Howdy, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Aliens and Cowboys podcast. I'm Joe. With me, as always, are Garrett and Nate.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
Just want to give a special shout out to all of our listeners, of course. We really do appreciate you guys tuning in each week and listening to us. Extra special shout out, though, we actually just found out we have a contingent of listeners in Australia, it looks like. So thank you guys so much. We think that's really cool. We really appreciate you listening and everybody else tuning in, of course, as well. As per usual, we like to start things off with just a little bit going on in pop culture news. Garrett, you want to kick some things off there?
Yeah, so one thing that Joe and I always talk about is we're big Star Wars fans, and recently came out these theories about episode 9?
Yeah, episode 9, that's right.
The idea of who the villains could be, and the idea of the theory of the Knights of Ren, since they haven't really kind of shown up in the story prior, that they are part of a force that has basically been put out in the really outer reaches of the galaxy that have basically been building the First Order, and that they're going to come back into the story now, and they're going to be the force that's going to help Kylo Ren establish himself. Or the other theory is they're going to come back and turn on Kylo Ren and become the villain force of Episode 9, thereby making Kylo Ren and Rey team up, thereby turning Kylo Ren as to a good side, good person.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that, anybody?
I'm excited for anything they do with the Knights of Ren. I'm dying to learn more about these guys, and I'm dying to see them in action on screen, whether they end up fighting alongside Kylo Ren, whether they turn against Kylo Ren. At this point, I don't much care. I'm just excited to see them. And yeah, it's all but been confirmed that they will appear in some fashion in the movie. So I'm very excited about that.
I'm ready to see Kylo Ren either rise to the occasion and totally dominate over the Knights, right? He just has to come out and like totally destroy the Knights and take his claim to the throne. Or I do like the alternative where he teams up with Rey and he kind of has this duality with himself, as he can be good and bad depending on the circumstance.
See, I'll go ahead and I'll be on the record as I want him to stay as the villain.
Okay.
I don't want him to be as emo anymore as he's been in the first two movies. I want him to take that step, Nate, like you said, and dominate. I want him to become a Vader-type character. I don't want the redemption story of Vader. I want Kylo Ren to be succumbed to the dark side and not come back. Another theory, though, would be that there's a second apprentice that Snoke has that might show up. And then if that shows up, that becomes the villain or a competitive issue with Kylo Ren.
Oh, that ruins the rule of 2.
That's right.
It's the rule of 3.
Well, they never clarified if Snoke was a Sith.
It's true.
So we just know he's Force adept, and however they want to move along with that.
Wasn't there an acronym for Snoke, like Sith? No one knew something about. I don't know if fans made that up or if it has any like legitimacy in the actual.
I don't know if you made that
up. Google did.
Google did.
No,
we will check back on that. I'm not sure.
Our research department is lacking.
Yeah, we need to hire one of those people. If you want an unpaid internship, you can join our team. No, I think that Kylo Ren, it would be nice to have him stay the villain. I know that Star Wars is about redemption stories, and a lot of characters historically throughout the movies have these redemption arcs. I just kind of want him to stay true to his character. He had the chance to turn. He didn't. He took that side.
He commits pretty fully to going bad.
Yeah.
There's not much way to come back from that.
And the reason why I also think, too, is that theory of the two, right? The apprentice and the master, and the apprentice slaying the master. He clearly kills Snoke in the second movie. I'd like him to take that mantle, run with it, be that next villain, and not come back. Like, if you kill him off, fine. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with Rey defeating him. I just don't want him to. I don't want a happy ending. I don't want him to have a happy ending. I don't want everybody to be holding hands at the end of the movie with Force ghosts around everybody.
Right.
You know, I don't want to.
We're all sitting around the campfire.
Yeah.
Like, well, that was great.
Yeah, I don't want a big old dinner like the Ewoks had.
Yeah.
Episode 8 was all about like the theory crafting of having gray Jedi, right? About how there's, again, I'll use the same word again, duality between managing your emotions, and you could have them one way or the other, but just not to the extremes.
Right.
I think maybe they could go somewhere with that. And my extreme guess is that, maybe he makes a sacrificial moment right at the end. Yeah. He tries to redeem himself. But, that's me throwing a
Yeah, he just has
That
those
could be a possibility,
whiplashes
yeah.
of emotions.
He
And
does.
it's just, and I get it. He's
very unpredictable.
He's, not. I don't want to say he's not a child clearly, but he's clearly not fully trained either. And so I would actually hope that he would have more expressions of large amounts of power. Almost dangerously have these expressions of power. Rey too, because she's not really fully trained as far as we said, right? We don't get those training montages that we got of Luke in Empire Strikes Back to see that he's going through this. We got some, but she's really mostly training on her own. You don't really get a lot of Luke in there with her. Only one or two spots where she's harnessing into the Force. I just like to see these people be more unstable because they aren't Jedi Knights. They don't have that training, and I want to see those explosions of power.
Yeah.
That I feel like they're, would bring a lot to their characters and to the Force.
Totally. I think one thing I was reading about as well was the fact that they're continually almost trying to outdo the episode that came before, or the movie that came before, which I totally understand. So I hope that this culminates in an epic lightsaber duel of some kind, involving whether it's Knights of Ren, Jedi that have come back, that have been in hiding for a very long time, maybe a secretive order of some kind. I'd love to just see a massive lightsaber battle of some kind too. And who knows if they're going to take that direction, but I think it'd be cool.
I mean, anything's on the table. It doesn't seem like they really plan this trilogy out as 3 movies that go together. It's more like they're planning these movies out individually and trying to connect them.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the difference because they just went with different directors and they should have just kept the same director for all 3 movies. Luckily, they're going to bring back J.J. Abrams for the 3rd movie.
Very excited about that.
Now that Johnson killed off his entire crew of people. So good luck. I guess you can just bring them all back. But I would like to have seen, maybe get the feel that they had a better plan in place. But
yeah,
anyways, one thing to bring up too, I want to bring up, I guess I want to ask Nate. Nate, where you at in Diablo?
All right, season 16, I chose a Crusader.
Nice. Yeah. That class is fun.
I was going to say just the opposite.
Really? Oh, love the
So
Crusader.
I came from my first character doing Demon Hunter, and I started with Witch Doctor on the PC, but I came over to Xbox. And I found this niche where I just could not do anything for the longest time until I finished the first 4 full objectives for the season, got the full Blessed Hammer set, and now I'm making some progress, and I'm trying to fill in the gaps and try to get to that Torment 10, where I get some really good gear. But I'm struggling right now. I'm hurting.
You need a new game. You shouldn't even put that game away for a while.
I got too many hours.
Pick up Red Dead.
The season's not done yet.
Pick up Red Dead.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So last week, Joe, we touched on the idea of Batman. It just happened to be the next day they dropped some news. Go ahead and fill us in on what they let out.
Sounds good. We had been discussing that a little bit last week, and we'd speculated at the time, will Ben Affleck return? Will he not for this next Batman installment? It is official. Ben Affleck is not returning as Batman. So now we have casting options. Who knows? I have no idea who they're going to pick for this.
Any ideas of who you'd want to see play Bruce Wayne?
No.
I'll tell you what I want.
I think it's an intimidating role for anybody to take.
I think it is. Yeah, that's very true. What I want to see is, this isn't what they're doing, but I'd love to see them do a Batman Beyond movie. Did you guys watch that? Your kids?
Nope.
No? Oh, so good. It's about essentially an old Bruce Wayne who's retired. He's passing the mantle on to a new, younger Batman. So this is never going to happen, but I want to see them bring back Michael Keaton as an old Bruce Wayne, training a younger Batman in the style of Batman Beyond. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I was reading a bit about that online. I'm like, yes, please make this a thing. We know that's not the trajectory at all, because last week we talked about it's going to be more of a noir-style detective story, which I'm still excited about. But yeah, the whole Batman Beyond thing got me excited too. But
I'm excited. I heard you guys talk on the podcast because I listened to it after it's gone. But
thank you for listening.
You're welcome. And no, but I thought it was so interesting because that's a totally new direction that I don't think has ever been done in the live-action movies at all, or probably even the old TV shows where they're climbing up a vertical wall horizontally, if you know what I'm talking about, Adam West.
Yep.
But
little shark repellent.
Exactly. But yeah, I don't know if they choose a star that is an unknown. I don't think you can do that. I think you have to choose a known actor who's going to carry the film and is willing to take up the mantle for a while, because I'm sure there's a multiple movie deal on something like that.
Two things. First off, good thing that Nate subscribes to the podcast, because that was going to be a question for you later, Nate. Second question, what would you guys feel about Michael Fassbender playing?
Oh, I'd be totally cool with that. I think that's a good casting choice. I think he's got the swagger, can be suave for Bruce Wayne, but he's got that raw power and physicality for Batman.
And he's got a seriousness to him. If you're going to make him more of a detective, I feel like that's something where maybe a little more darker. I mean, Christian Bale was dark, but let's be fair. I don't think he's anybody's favorite Batman. I think his voice, the decision they took with him talking, really killed it.
Kind of,
That's another question that comes to mind for me is if they're going to do a detective story, who's the villain? Do they have to go with a Riddler? Is the first thought that comes to my mind.
I think they would open up. I think Gotham, the show, has brought a lot of different villains to the forefront of people's minds who don't read comics. And I feel like they have a lot of options for people and types of story because they're not really they're not really powerful as super villains as equal to superheroes. They're not showing that type of super
like physicality,
right? They make it realistically exist, and I feel like they have villains that you could kind of bring out, or why not?
Well, I don't think they're going to choose like the Mad Hatter. That's like way too of a ridiculous concept.
Why can't they
way too of a niche?
Why
villain.
can't they bring back Ra's al Ghul? Have a crime spree of these basically ninja assassins that are either killing people or getting away with things, and he's tracking down and
I like where your head's at.
Yeah.
I'd buy that.
I'd watch it, for sure.
You guys would go to anything Batman. It doesn't matter.
Also true. Yeah, but I'm interested to see what happens. As we mentioned last time, too, it's a ways off. Probably 2020 at the earliest, more than likely into 2021, potentially. This is super early production, so who knows what's going to happen with that. I just had one last thing to add, too.
Sure.
Real quick. It's kind of old news, but it ties into our podcast topic for this week as well. So this was back in November 2017. I'm sure a lot of you listeners already know this, but it was actually Amazon Studios who acquired the rights to make a minimum of 5 seasons of the Lord of the Rings series. Which is pretty cool. I'm really excited about this. I think Lord of the Rings, the lore, the mythology behind it will lend itself very well to a TV series.
Agreed. I believe they have $1 billion budget for this show, too. It's an Amazon production. It's supposed to, I think, be their response to maybe Game of Thrones. Don't have any idea if it's going to be as dark and bloody, but it is going to be a huge adventure epic that they're going to produce.
Very much so.
And if anybody hasn't seen some Amazon original shows, they're pretty good.
They are.
So I would expect to have a good cast, and obviously they have money to throw behind this. So I think let's put it this way, they should not fail.
Yeah, I have a very hard time imagining that this won't do well. I think it would be amazing.
It would be interesting if they bring in some of the characters from these movies, too. And I think that's a question people have is, where does this fit in the timeline? And will we see in you the characters? Maybe not the actors that played them, but will we see a Legolas or a Gimli or a Frodo?
Is it essentially a remake, or is it like something on a side quest?
See, that's the thing. I think it's supposed to exist in the timeline. I don't think it's supposed to be the story of the trilogy.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
The rumor mill right now is essentially indicating, and this is still speculation, but it might follow a younger Aragorn. So keep in mind, by the events of The Lord of the Rings, he's actually pretty old. He's blessed with long life.
Yeah.
So he's actually pretty old. So there's a lot of years that they could use to actually pursue what his life was like as a ranger before the events of Lord of the Rings. So a lot of people are saying that could be it. Regardless, production is supposed to start this year, I think. So we might not see the series for a while yet, but I think production is starting here pretty soon, which is pretty great. Go ahead, Garrett.
Also, because Joe said that this was going to kind of give away our topic, if you haven't guessed, our topic is going to be Lord of the Rings. We did not tell you on last week's podcast. We haven't mentioned that yet. So if you are still with us, please don't turn it off. We're not going to review the movie The Lord of the Rings.
No, we're not.
We are going to discuss the first movie / book in a way of thematically breaking it down. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to be a rehash and scene by scene, best quote, stuff like that. We're not doing that. So if you are a fan of Lord of the Rings, or if you've seen it, stick around for us here. We're going to, like I said, we have a different way we're going to break this down and discuss it. So
definitely.
Joe, go ahead and take that away for us.
Yeah, let's dive right in here. So just as Garrett mentioned, we are going to be, of course, discussing Lord of the Rings. Most specifically, though, we are going to focus on the first installment of that. So Fellowship of the Ring specifically. Largely, we do want to focus on the movie. We're certainly going to discuss some of the key book elements that are there. And some of the differences, we'll probably reference that throughout this episode. But we are going to focus largely on the movie adaptation, okay? So you guys can follow along, of course, in regard to that. Obviously, just some general background these movies and books are hugely popular. They inspired, I think, many people into a lot of the fantasy franchises that exist today. So hugely impactful in the world of fantasy and fiction.
Before we get started, where does this rank as far as your guys' adventure epics? I don't want to call it, say trilogy, because some adventures aren't trilogies. Like Star Wars is a trilogy, but now it's turned into 9 movies, right?
Yeah.
And there's more to it than that.
Exactly.
Harry Potter is 7 movies. I don't want to use the idea of a trilogy, but where does this fit as far as your adventure epics? Is this one of your guys' favorites? Do you prefer other ones? Go ahead.
It's kind of a middle ground for me. I'm a fan. I enjoy watching the movies all the time. You can understand like the vastness and the greatness of this world, and I think one of the things that really draws people to the Lord of the Rings is the amount of detail J.R.R. Tolkien puts into every little thing that he does in the writings that are then converted into these movies. But in contrast, if you're looking at like Star Wars, I feel like there's a lot of open-endedness where people can fill in the gaps, but there's nothing really truly defined as far as canon goes, and you can kind of take liberties there and expand the universe and the galaxy there.
Yeah, his world building was, massive. You're talking languages, you're talking histories, geography. It was a very vast world he built.
Maps in the books, right?
Yep, maps in the books, and people actually study this almost as if it was real history.
Correct.
Just the level of detail here is insane.
Riddles and, like you said, made up languages. It goes so deep.
Well, there's college courses taught on this, and obviously
a
lot of science fiction writers have to start with this. They use this and they tear it apart. They either build it up, however they want to work it. Joe, where does this one rank for you?
This ranks right toward the top. I know we talked a little bit about this just the other day. Like, if you had to pick one, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, because both of those franchises are hugely important to me. It'd be tough. I don't even know. It just would depend on the day. So this is tied for first place for me.
Okay.
For how much I love both books and movies of the series.
See, for me, I would say if I'm going to adventure epics, and I don't want to know if I want to bring in Terminator into something like this. For me, number one is always going to be Harry Potter. That's just something that means a lot to me when I was growing up, and that's my favorite. Star Wars is very important too, and I just really enjoy that.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to bring in other things like Marvel. I think I enjoy Lord of the Rings, but I also feel like, I can get the elements that I'm looking for in this somewhere else. And granted, we can make the argument that the things I like the best pulled from Lord of the Rings, right? Which we'll kind of dive into a little bit probably later tonight.
Yeah.
But I just think that there's, I don't know, I wasn't as big of a fan. I didn't read the books. I read The Hobbit. I read the first half of Lord of the Rings Fellowship, the book. Other than that, I didn't read the other books, just watched the movies. And so, I don't know, maybe I was not a big, huge fan. I enjoyed them, but again, they're no Harry Potter. So
Fair enough, yeah. And I think a lot of that, too, you mentioned kind of in terms of childhood and the impact that can have. And I remember before I was really old enough even to comprehend and probably be able to read these books effectively on my own, my dad and I actually used to read these before I went to bed. So he used to read the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy to me, as well as The Hobbit. So those were some of my honestly earliest memories of getting into reading as well as fantasy. So it's, hugely impactful on me and kind of what inspires me to this day. So, yeah, definitely very important. Without further ado, we'll kind of dive into some of these topics. As we had mentioned previously, this is really what we're trying to do. We're not going to rate the movie or go through the categories that we use to review movies like we've done in other episodes. This is really a lot of the themes that we're going to focus in on for today's discussion. And I just wanted to open up with one of the most iconic parts of the trilogy. I'll read it for you. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky. 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone. 9 for mortal men doomed to die. 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all. 1 ring to find them. 1 ring to bring them all and in the darkness bind them in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. So this sets the tone for everything. Obviously, Lord of the Rings overall, for people who may not know what this is about, there are rings of power. There's one specifically that was forged in secret by the Dark Lord Sauron. It holds dominion over pretty much all of the other rings. It's his way to try and control the world of Middle-earth. So our story picks up with Bilbo. Gandalf visits him, Bilbo's a hobbit, lives in the Shire. It's a very peaceful, idyllic kind of setting, of course. And it's really from here that events kick off. Bilbo leaves the ring to his nephew, Frodo. Frodo determines, with Gandalf's help, that this is indeed the one ring that can rule all of the other rings, and as such, it must be destroyed. So he sets out on this quest to go try and initially deliver the ring to the elves, and that's his first stage of his quest when he thinks he will be done. Obviously, things progress past this, where he actually has to take this burden on himself and actually go to Mount Doom, which is in the heart of enemy territory, and destroy it himself. So it's this epic quest. It spans 3 books, 3 movies, of course. A lot of good stuff to dig into here.
Okay.
For sure. All right, so first thing I want to discuss is just first thoughts. When was the last time you guys watched the movie, specifically?
I watched it probably a month ago.
Okay.
It was on Netflix.
Yes, it was
Maybe,
for a while.
maybe it was a little bit longer than a month ago.
You borrowed my copy, which is why I couldn't find it.
I did borrow his copy. Which, by
My
the way...
wife's. If
Yeah.
she listens to this, she's going to correct me.
By the way, a lot of her movies are in full screen version, which is horrible to rewatch. So go ahead and get those on Blu-ray. Thanks. I watched this about, like I said, probably maybe a month ago, a little over a month ago. I enjoyed it. It's just long. It's
long.
a drudge.
Especially those extended versions of
Yeah,
the movies. They're well in excess of 3 hours.
And of that trilogy, it's probably the least action-oriented.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
Do you agree with that?
a lot of exposition in this
Yeah.
movie, for
Yeah,
sure.
and
A
I
lot of
was
setup.
Yeah, and I felt like maybe it was me, but on the scenes, granted, this was more in the Two Towers because I ended up watching that one as well. Maybe it's just more when it's just Samwise Gamgee and Frodo. Man, it's just boring. There's just nothing going on. I have no tie to that. I'm all for the other aspect of the show about, the Dominion of Dwarves, Elves, and Men and fighting off orc armies. But I thought it was good. I like the acting. I mean, the superb cast in this movie, right?
Oh, yeah, excellent.
I think this is the movie that kind of discovered Orlando Bloom for at least an American audience, I think, right?
Yeah, it did.
At least that's the first time I remember seeing him. Iowa's own Elijah Wood.
That's right.
Frodo. Shout out to him, in case he's listening. But no, I saw this not too long ago. Thought it was okay. Not the best. Nate?
Yeah, it's probably been 5+ years since I've seen it.
Fair enough.
Hopefully you watched it for this.
I did. I sure did.
Yeah.
So thoughts on rewatching this? When you watched it yesterday?
Yeah, I thought I got to carve out another full night of movie watching, which I'm sure my wife loved too if she's listening. But it's research; it's got to be done.
Yep.
That's what I told her.
That's right. We are committed to this. We've
Yeah,
got to
this
learn
is
the
a commitment,
materials.
guys.
How else are we going to pay the bills?
Yeah, exactly right. No, Nate, you brought it up earlier. One of the things I love most about, especially the movies, are the visuals. Absolutely breathtaking. They filmed this in New Zealand, of course, and it's just amazing. The scenery is incredible. I'd love to go over there someday. The Hobbiton set is still standing, so you can actually go visit that and immerse yourself essentially in the world of Middle Earth.
Do you have to duck in those hill houses? Are they to scale?
So some of them were for filming with, so let's say when Ian McKellen would walk up as Gandalf, they had the facades, if you will, Hobbit-sized, and then a lot of the tricks they use is camera work, so they use a lot of perspective tricks in order to make certain actors appear smaller. Sometimes they use body doubles and stand-ins, too, for shots where the perspective tricks won't work. But yeah, in the actual Hobbiton set, over in New Zealand, I actually don't know how many of those are small scale, so to speak, or if there are any you can actually walk in. I don't know. We're going to have to take a trip to find out. That'd be great. There we go.
Aliens and Cowboys field trip.
Field trip. If we ever make it happen, we'll take bunches of pictures.
Yeah, Nate, your wife needs to sign that release form so you can go.
That's right. One thing I always love to bring up about the movie, because this is probably one of my favorite scenes and just little fun movie facts of any movie ever, is at the end when Aragorn's fighting the Uruk-hai captain. His name's Lurtz in the movie. But that actor threw the knife at him.
Yes.
Yeah, and Viggo Mortensen deflected the knife with his sword. That was not planned. That was just him acting fast enough to actually block the knife out of his face.
Yep.
And obviously it looked so cool that Peter Jackson was like, yeah, that's staying in the final cut.
So that knife was going to hit him in the face?
Probably.
Kill
yeah. Yeah, and that's him legitimately blocking a knife away from his person.
Yep.
That's how you do it.
When we talk about fate later, It's fate.
It's fate.
It's fate. Okay.
There you go. Yeah, obviously, it's a great movie. One of my all-time favorites. Something I wanted to dig into, though, next, beyond just the actual first thoughts of the movie, are some notable differences between the book and the movie. I wanted to get these out of the way up front because I don't want to spend necessarily too much time on this overall. We'll try and focus on the movie as much as we can, but I think some of these are worth noting. It's some of these things I personally find very interesting, and I think they would have had a big impact on the movie, though, overall as well, if they'd kept some of the stuff in. One of the biggest changes is actually Aragorn's characterization. I was reading up on this, and I'm surprised at how many people consider him to still not be heroic in this movie. That thought never occurred to me, but the more I did think about how he is in the book, the more I realized where they were coming from. The thought is that in the book, Aragorn is very confident and very self-sure about becoming king. He's not hesitant about this. In the movies, he's constantly kind of second-guessing his role and whether or not it's even a mantle he wants to take up. So that's something that is hugely different. I think it's when Elrond is talking to him when they're in Rivendell, after they've arrived in Rivendell, and Aragorn says, "I do not want that power. I never wanted it." He would never say that in the book. He's like, "I do want that power. I've been waiting for this moment, but that's exactly what I need to do, is wait for the right moment before I make my claim to the throne." So I think that's important to kind of point out. Also, I think thematically, this is a great choice by Peter Jackson. It adds some weight to the third movie, which we won't get into the third movie too much. But in the first book, the Shards of Narsil, which is what they reforge at the end of the last movie, he's carried that with him the whole time in the book. So by the time they get to Rivendell in the book, it's reforged, and he uses that throughout the rest of the series. In the movies, it gets reforged, and Elrond delivers it to Aragorn. And it's very thematically fulfilling, I think, right?
Correct.
It's Aragorn finally assuming his role and saying, "Yes, I will be the King of Gondor."
Well, to be fair, I also think having him act like he doesn't want this burden in the movie makes him a nice opposite to Boromir,
Yes.
who clearly wants that type of leadership and is not really craving it, but knows that he is a stand-in for a king, for the people of Gondor, and I feel like he has that nice contrast, right? Those two characters are kind of opposites of each other.
Definitely.
So
There's a certain amount of humility that I think people can relate to and appreciate, that he fulfills his role. He's powerful, but he doesn't want to take it. And then he kind of builds into this confidence where he does become a leader.
yeah, not just
Fits
that,
very
but
well.
like you said, the humility too of knowing he can't wield that ring, right? That this is a type of power. If he gets this ring, why does he think he would not succumb to the same thing that his ancestors did?
Exactly.
And I think that that's a kind of an interesting
Yeah, and he makes a
point
point
to
of that in the movie.
Correct.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah, something about he has the same weakness
Yes.
in him. Yeah, no, that's a
The
great
same
point.
blood
Dan.
running through
Yeah.
his veins, that he will make the same folly and succumb to the ring.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just don't know how a cocky Aragorn would have been in the movie.
I agree.
and I just think that's an interesting take, and I think that's a very astute change that Jackson makes, making him a little more humble.
I agree. I think that translates much better to the screen. Like you guys were saying, he's more relatable on screen, I think. There's something to be said about reading it. It's written more as almost that old, heroic, noble figure. But
Right.
keep in mind, the books are less focused on character development, I would say, of Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli. It really focuses on the Hobbit's development.
Okay.
The movie does a good job of making everyone's story kind of important. Everyone's character develops in some way by the end of the trilogy. So I think it's just a little bit different for what they set out to do. But I agree with you, Garrett. I think Peter Jackson's decision to make Aragorn hesitant, and then how he ends up reforging Narsil into Andoril by the end of the third film, I think it works very well on screen.
Got it.
Certainly. Yeah. Very much agree with you there. Another thing I just wanted to bring up was regarding Tom Bombadil, which, if you haven't read the books, this is someone who doesn't even appear in the movie in the slightest. I don't think they even reference him. What is very interesting about Tom Bombadil, though, is he's one of the oldest, if not the oldest person in Middle-earth, which is really kind of cool. So he's referred to as the elves by the oldest and fatherless. He lived east of the Shire in the books, in the Old Forest. So when the hobbits first set out on their quest, this is going to be in regard to Sam, Frodo, Merry, and Pippin, they actually run into some trouble. It's this character of Tom Bombadil who saves them in the book, takes them back to his house in the Old Forest, and some weird things happen. This whole scene in the books is very dreamlike. And what we discover is that Tom Bombadil really is not affected at all by the powers of the ring. He's able to try it on. He does not disappear. Frodo, thinking that, well, does this ring still have magical abilities? Like, he's super confused in the books that Tom was able to slide this on and not disappear. So Frodo slides it on to see if it still works, essentially, and Tom talks directly to him. Tom can see him. He knows exactly where he's sitting, exactly where he's at. So he's the only character that comes immediately to mind that is anything like this in the books, which is, of course, probably why he was cut from the movie. He doesn't really do much to advance the plot. He's someone the hobbits encounter, and then he's never addressed again, hardly at all. He's brought up in the Council of Elrond in the books, and they shoot down the reasons as to why giving him the ring would be a viable option. They say, nope, let's not do that. But I just think it's interesting that they omitted someone as powerful as him, even though I can understand why they chose to do so. But that's what I want to get your guys' take on as well. What do you think about having this character who's unlike anyone else in the trilogy? If he showed up in the movie, he seems to be almost all-powerful. Would you have wanted to see something like that, or do you think it slows it down and is unneeded?
I think it slows it down and you don't need him. I think he takes away from the entire journey and really the reason for the hobbits to take this ring to Mordor themselves. If this guy is all end all be all powerful, this movie's done in 25 minutes, right? This doesn't become a journey of walking, right? He's done. So I feel like cutting that character out, not only that, but if we don't really know what his real impact on the overarching story is, even in the book, then really he's not really an important character. And I don't know if he has a special stand-in, I guess. I've not read the book all the way through. I think actually that's the chapter I probably stopped at. I think it's like chapter 10 or something like that.
It's pretty early on, yeah. It's pretty early on, the Fellowship of the Ring.
Does he have a more significant meaning? I'm sure somebody out there that might listen to this that probably studies this is like, yeah, of course he has more significant meaning, right? You idiot. So if he has more significant meaning, I'm not sure, but I don't think he's needed in the movie.
My only thought is if you have, heroes are only as good as their villains. So if you have an all-powerful hero, but he has no villain to oppose him, then kind of you lose purpose within that story as to, well, then why didn't you just give it to Tom? Tom would hang on to it, and everything would be okay.
I mean, this would be like this would almost be like if Thanos had all the stones to start the Infinity War, and he just snapped his finger at the beginning of the movie, and it was done. I don't see thematically why that would work, and I'm glad that they kept that character out. Considering they have some very powerful characters already in there.
They do. There's quite a few very powerful people,
correct.
I agree. And yes, to both of your points, they do explain it away in the books during the Council of Elrond for two different reasons. One of which, Tom Bombadil thinks nothing of the ring. He thinks it's really no more special than any other ring, so he'd probably lose it. They legitimately think that he would just lose track of where it's at, so he can't really be trusted with it. Not because he's malicious, but he's just going to forget where he put it.
But it holds no value to him if it doesn't do anything, right?
Exactly. So that's why he cares so little for it, because
right.
it doesn't really do anything to him.
Makes sense.
And then, additionally, they also explain away the reason why they shouldn't give it to Tom is because it's delaying the inevitable. Tom can't destroy it physically, he can't crush it or anything, and he's sure not hiking to Mount Doom. So their thought there is that we have to be proactive to go destroy this thing. If we hide it any further, bad guys are eventually going to find it and track it down anyway. So they do explain away in the book why they don't take it.
So here's the unanswered question.
Yeah.
What if he kept the ring and they showed up to collect it? What happens then?
That's a great question. We'd learn how powerful Tom Bombadil is.
Correct.
Yeah.
If the Wraiths showed up, you know.
Maybe they're the equal villain to his hero. I don't know.
Maybe he's Neo. You know what I mean? And they're
He
the
is
agents.
the one.
And
Yeah.
he just takes everybody out.
Who knows? Yeah. He'd just do a one-man defense against the entire armies of Mordor and everything. Yeah. Last one, guys, then we'll move on. There's another character. He's very powerful and very popular in the book, so just wanted to give him a shout-out, too. His name's Glorfindel. This role was changed a little bit. Also, I think, smartly by Peter Jackson. Glorfindel's book role was actually given to Arwen in the movies. Yeah, so technically in the books it's this elf character Glorfindel who comes to the aid of the hobbits and Aragorn when they're trying to escape the ring wraiths. It's a little bit different in the book, but similar scene in regard to the waves coming, they crash through, they kill the horses, are able to escape from the ring wraiths, and he's immensely powerful. This character of Glorfindel is immensely powerful within the Lord of the Rings. Overall, I think it's smart to give Arwen a bigger role in the movie, and obviously it's very clear that she's capable in being able to handle herself as well. So
well, it builds that connection of that love interest between Aragorn and Arwen, and I think that that's pretty important for his distinction because he's going to have that conflict of interest coming in the second movie where he's going to kind of have to fight his urge between the human life and the ranger life, living with the elves, stuff like that. So I think I'm fine with that.
Perfect. Fair enough. Next thing we'll dive into then, as I mentioned earlier, we might reference the book at times, but a lot of this we're going to try and stick pretty close to the movie from here on out. But the first theme I just want to bring up is this idea of adventure, the idea of a traditional hero's journey, which I think, by and large, the Lord of the Rings falls into in many ways. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Bagginses, and they allude to that as Bilbo. I mean, they never leave the Shire. All they do is their entire lives are sitting there in the Shire, and they talk about how one day he gets pushed out onto his door by Gandalf, and all these adventures happen and amazing things occur, and that only happens, I mean, for the most part, that I know of at least, to him, and then he has all these stories to share with the whole Shire, and Frodo kind of envies him for that, and is kind of waiting for his maybe opportunity to do it. And that comes about.
Yeah.
I think the hero's journey is interesting, specifically for this movie, because like Nate said, these guys are living in a protected society, right? They don't have any outside connection, really, other than Gandalf, who clearly comes into the Shire. This is an interesting journey because not only is this going to be a character that's going to be on a personal determination, but think of like the changing world as this character also goes and interacts with other characters. Because if hobbits aren't leaving, other people don't know about hobbits, right? So they don't know about the outside world doesn't know about them. So it's kind of not only opening them up on a personal side, opening the world up to hobbits as a whole as well.
Just to add on to that, like from a sociological level, like you only know what you know until you go out and learn something else from some other race or some other thing or adventure or creature. If you step out of those boundaries, so those people are limited to only what they know from the Shire, which is essentially like an agricultural society, and they just keep to their own, and that's all they know, and that's fine. That's life for them.
Sure. Well, let's broaden this and back this out to a more generic hero's journey. Hero gets item. Hero must take item to location. Right? This is a trope that is used a lot of times in different movies. I don't want to, it's not like, say, Star Wars. He receives that lightsaber, and that lightsaber is kind of what triggers him to go on these adventures. Harry Potter, he finds out he's a wizard. I don't want to say he gets an item, but he gets some form of information.
Yeah, it's
it
knowledge.
Changes his life, right?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of...
Some sort of catalyst, maybe, is a
right,
better description.
Right, and I think that that's interesting, too. But I think that this, like I said, having to take item from A to B, I don't know, it's a very successful trope because you can stack from A to B with a million obstacles and a million characters. And I think that will help develop the hero and the hero's journey, through ups and downs along the way.
Definitely. I think those are great observations to make. And something I love about just that beginning part in the movie is you do have Frodo, I think, kind of swinging back and forth between his desire for adventure from hearing everything that Bilbo has done versus realizing the task ahead of him if he were to take this ring, by his account so far, just to Rivendell, which is already a huge journey for him to undertake. So you see him kind of going back and forth, and then he hardens his resolve when Gandalf expresses to him the importance of this errand, and he decides that, yes, he makes the choice, he's going to step up, he's going to go take this ring to Rivendell, which I think is pretty important.
Another thing to think about is, like, a part of this hero's journey is a guy who has never left the Shire, from my understanding, and he's going to risk his life for all these good people that he knows nothing about. He knows nothing about their worlds or how they would treat him in that sort of a any interaction or anything, and yet he does it. He takes on the burden of the ring, and he's going to travel to Mount Doom.
Yeah, he does. Very true. And I think that's something that Tolkien was pretty interested in telling a story about was the idea of these unlikely heroes. This idea of someone peaceful, essentially farmers, almost in a way, in terms of the hobbits, taking on this huge burden, and it's not the person you would think of in a lot of stories as being the one to take this ring. You probably envision someone like Aragorn as being the warrior hero, the leader, who'll be like, yes, I will take this burden, and I will go vanquish my foes and my enemies and destroy the ring. But he subverts that a little bit.
In all accounts, they're the least capable individuals for actually doing this task.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Well,
besides their affinity to reject the ring's ability to bring out evil in an individual.
Exactly. And that's, of course, a huge driving factor behind why they're great candidates to carry such an evil object, is because they are such a peaceful, kind people that they can resist these powers more effectively than others.
Well, almost innocent like a child.
Yeah.
Because if you think about our favorite adventure stories we talked about, the idea of children are the catalyst for starting this, right? Luke Skywalker is kind of a child in A New Hope, right? Now, Mark Hamill's not a child, but the character is young. Harry Potter's 11, right? John Connor, when we really get first chance of John Connor in Terminator, he's a boy.
It's true.
These
it's
ideas,
with innocence.
Right,
Yeah.
it's innocence,
Right?
but also the symbolism of this hobbit as a child because he's so small, right? They're incapable of themselves at the time this journey starts from actually doing said task. And that journey itself makes them go from unlikely hero to hero by the end of it, whether they get bigger, stronger, faster, more knowledge, more power. The point is, you start them as the child or the innocent, hobbit, for instance, and you move him to the end where, his resiliency is what's going to carry him essentially to Mordor. And I think that's all these characters in our favorite tropes here, these unlikely heroes to start.
The other thing I just thought of too is you look at the human world and they all have kings that rule and have dominion, right?
Yes.
But if you look at maybe the Shire, and with my limited knowledge, there's no one that rules the Shire.
It's more like a culture. They have a culture that you can't disrupt, or you really get
right. But everyone does their part.
Ostracized.
There's no one ruling them and telling them what to do. There's just a community that works together to supply this way of life. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the mentality that maybe those guys bring to the table too.
Sure.
Yeah, I like that idea as well. And you're right, there isn't, at least not as far as what we're thinking of with the kingdoms of Gondor and Rohan as being a king. It is just kind of a peaceful community that are trying their best just to coexist with one another. Something worth noting as well, the detachment of rangers that Aragorn fights alongside. They are in a kingdom just to the north of the Shire called Andor, and they kind of help protect outside forces from invading the Shire in a way as well. So it's interesting that probably a lot of the hobbits in the Shire, maybe they don't even fully comprehend why their way of life is so peaceful, because they have these unseen protectors that are helping their community thrive the way it is.
That's a book detail, right? Not a movie detail.
I don't think a movie detail per se. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they label that in the movie.
And maybe what's the motivation for that? I mean, why would they spend their efforts and time and maybe lay down their lives to protect the Shire? Because what do they produce for the Rangers in return?
Nothing, really.
It's a pristine society, though.
Yeah.
It's a pristine culture. We can tackle
They
this
recognize
later.
value there and they want to maintain.
What if they recognize fate? And the idea that somewhere that there's some knowledge that this is a task they must have, that they are basically burdened with protectors of this great power themselves. Because again,
So even if they don't have value, that maybe someday
right,
they have knowledge that there will be value there, and they don't know when it's going to come, and they need to continue to protect
right.
it.
Because is the ring the most ultimate powerful item, or is it the ring bearer that's carrying that ring the most powerful thing that doesn't really succumb to it? And so the idea is Frodo the ultimate weapon, or is he the ultimate power? And if are they just simply the Knights Templar, right? Are they protecting this symbolically, this power? And I think that's, I don't know. Again, it's not in a movie really, so it's a detail that a lot of people probably don't get, and it's all up for debate. I mean,
yeah, I think that's all great things to bring up as well. Kingdom to the north is also Arnor. I apologize, I said Andor.
Oh, you're gonna
I
get
apologize.
roasted.
Yeah,
Here come the comments.
Don't call me out on that one. My apologies. But I think you both brought up something that's a perfect segue into the next theme, if I may. And that is, you were talking about this earlier, Nate, as well. Duality, dualism in general. And there is a lot of it in The Lord of the Rings. The most obvious, arguably, is just the classic struggle of good versus evil. Is that why maybe the Rangers, for example, are protecting the Shire for no other reason than they recognize this is a good place? These are evil people. We need to protect the good from the bad.
I just like to point out maybe first on the good versus evil.
Yeah.
How well Peter Jackson absolutely points out the stereotypes for these particular, the good versus evil. You can look at the colors. The Nazgul are black. The other ones are natural colors like green and blue. The edges, as far as smooth surfaces in the natural world versus kind of the sharp and pointy armor of the Nazgul.
Yeah.
You can talk about language types, and I might get some heartburn over this one, but as far as like, if you listen to someone who speaks German, it's a very harsh language, right? Versus someone who speaks French. And if you hear the two different languages and they say the same thing, your mind naturally goes to two different places if you don't know either language. On the connotation of what you think they just said, right?
Or history.
Or history. Yeah, I'm not knowledgeable in that either. I'll be the first to admit. But then you also look at like the orcs and the elves. How elegant they just walk versus the other ones who are more intimidating and forceful. You can look at the weather too, and how clouds and how the darkness overcomes certain areas. I mean, there's just so many different things. There's symmetry in the elves, which we know naturally, like in the brain, you find attractive people, people who are more symmetrical, more attractive than people who are not. Just unkempt, people who take care of themselves, the orcs again versus the elves. So many things that are just so stereotypical versus good versus evil. It's very easy to delineate one versus the other.
Very much so. I think there's a lot of great visual cues to, without doubt, determine who you should be rooting for in this movie versus who you should be rooting against. Definitely. And that ties in, too, to this idea of war versus peace as well, which is juxtaposed from the very beginning when Bilbo's talking about how the hobbits love peace and good-tilled earth, I think is what he says. This kind of simple, natural lifestyle that's at peace. And then the fact that this exists outside what is the norm for just about everybody else in Middle-earth, which is being constantly on edge because of all these various evil outside forces that are gaining power again.
And that's interesting, and I guess obviously the book will play into the Shire's protected, right? And so they don't understand or even have knowledge of that concept. A lot of times you have that famous saying, if you want peace, prepare for war, right? Mm-hmm. So the Shire doesn't know that. They don't have to. Everybody else has armies. Everybody else has fortifications. They have these castles, right? They have armies. This invading force, basically, of orcs forces them to take proactive measures. But what's nice about it is this fellowship that gets created, this journey, they're not taking this as this will just be us walking, we need to peacefully do this and not encounter anything. They're very realistic to the idea that this will be extremely dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
We are literally walking into the heart of Mount Doom to drop this ring into a volcano. This is going to be, we might not all survive. Life will not be the same when you get back. And I think that that's something that's kind of this interesting idea of war, and the idea that there's no democracy. There's no democracy. There's no I'm trying to think of the phrase I'm trying to come up with. There's no diplomacy. Wrong D word.
There's no surrender.
Right, but there's no negotiating. They're not negotiating with yours. Whether there's a language
captured.
Even language barrier aside, they're not negotiating because it seems like the darkness, not only weather-wise, it's coming across the land, right, and killing things, but this army of orcs is going across the land, and make a very good point to show that as they come into these different villages, they're basically just pillaging the village. They're basically killing who stays there, and they're burning everything to the ground. And I think it's even a comment made by Sauron, I think. Or is it Saruman? Saruman, where he's just like, burn it all, right? And it's just, they just wipe across.
Can I touch on that too? So like when you get into a grand epic like The Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, you get so lost in the names of people and places. Someone can help me out with this, but why is J.R.R. Tolkien taking Saruman and Sauron so closely? Because they are easily confused. Yeah, and they align on the same side of the evil side.
They didn't start that way.
No, they didn't start that way. That's correct.
And we can debate that, because that's going to be something that's going to kind of have to be brought up. Because if we're talking about peace or war, Saruman might realize, well, this Sauron's too powerful. Like the idea that if we're going to have these alliances, this is a really interesting thing. These old alliances aren't good anymore. So, this is going to be great. Sorry, let's get into this debate. So,
let's do it.
Garrett's taking his shirt off.
Yeah,
he's ready to rumble.
He's getting ready to go here. He's going to throw down.
There's a concept of realism in this story. That Saruman is the most realistic person in this story. The idealism of this fellowship in past alliances is key to a lot of these main characters, right? That's all they know. That's what they respect. They're honorable. Saruman's thinking, well, if I want to survive, my best chance is to clearly align myself with Sauron and his army, which is incredibly more powerful than the dominion of man, dwarf, and elf. And so the realism of Saruman versus the idealism of someone like Gandalf. Idealism is asking a child to take a ring across the world to drop it in a volcano. Yeah. Realism is, this guy's the most powerful being. This army's the most powerful large army that's on Middle Earth. I'm going to side with that.
Yeah. I mean, he's sitting there hedging his bet, right? He's got, all right, what are the chances that 4 different races, hobbits, elves, humans, and dwarves, are going to come together to fight a singly minded army that is going for one objective?
Yeah, it's like a hive mind, right?
Exactly.
They have one objective. And not only that.
He's a betting man, and I think he's got his head in the right place as far as, why would you take that bet? Because if one of those 4 races crumbles, the whole thing shatters.
Well, let's be fair. His hubris to let Gandalf survive is his downfall. Had he killed Gandalf, the story's done, right? They're not overcoming that. 2 Towers, they're not overcoming that.
I'd like to touch on that point, too. That is the weirdest quote-unquote wizard fight I've ever seen. They just, shoot telekinesis from their wands or walking staffs the whole time.
I did
not like that.
I do think that won Best Fight Scene for MTV Movie Awards back when that came out. I think if you go back and watch the year that this came out, it won Best Fight Scene. I'm pretty sure.
You're kidding me.
No.
Huh. A lot of Tolkien fans out there.
There are a lot of Tolkien fans out there.
They're just not listening to this podcast.
No, I think that is a unique way to look at it, but I would argue Saruman is privileged enough to make that choice.
Okay.
Because he's already very powerful. He's the most powerful wizard and one of the most powerful beings in Middle-earth. So he's saying, okay, I can hedge my power. I know that I can align myself with Sauron and try to make things happen on my own agenda, which Gandalf calls him out on and says there's only one Lord of the Ring and he does not share power. So Gandalf calls Saruman out on the fact that, hey, your plan's going to fail. Sauron's not going to share his power. Once he uses you for his own ends, he's probably going to get rid of you as well. Because Sauron's hugely intolerant. The idea is that he's just going to wipe everybody off the face of Middle-earth, whether you're human, elf, dwarf, hobbit, otherwise.
I have a question for you, Joe.
Yeah.
Which I 2 things. One, I'm going to go DBZ on you. What are the power levels of a gray wizard versus a white wizard?
That's over 9,000. Yeah, so white wizards are at the top. So Saruman the White is the top tier. Then you have Gandalf the Grey, just below him, I would say, in terms of power. You know of Radagast the Brown, and this is where even, I don't know.
This is like a brown belt?
Yeah, kind of, I guess.
So you got brown belt, gray belt, white belt?
Yeah, Radagast the Brown, who makes an appearance in the Hobbit movies as well. And then you actually have two more that are never even addressed, which are the two blue wizards. And I believe in the books they go off adventuring far to the east. So they aren't even really present for the events of the War over the Ring. I don't think that they are present there. But there are 5 wizards that
Is there anything that
have
can
power in Middle-earth.
Kind of compare like a gray versus a white? Because it seemed almost equal when those two were shooting their walking sticks at one another.
Except one won the fight and the other one didn't.
Exactly. I understand that. But he took some licks while doing it.
He did, yeah. I mean, Gandalf didn't go down without a fight.
I think it's just going to come down to the difference between, say, a blue lightsaber and a green lightsaber. Right?
That's a good analogy,
kind of like a apprentice versus a master. That the gray is not fully developed into the full knowledge base of the magical arts, is my assumption.
Yeah, I mean, and it kind of alludes to the fact, I don't really disagree with you. In practice, that's kind of the way it is. I think for the lore behind it, is it the intent for Saruman to be the most powerful wizard? I would say yes, the intent of Saruman to be that. But Gandalf has got to be just pretty much right there. And it's, I know we're trying to keep to the first movie and first book, but skipping ahead to the second, of course, Gandalf does come back, more powerful than ever.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, he's just ready to rock.
It reminds me going back to our Star Wars, Qui-Gon, if you just listened, you'd be on the council. If you just listened, they'd give you the white robe. It's just a decision like that. I think the one thing that's really kind of frustrating sometimes is the idea of the white wizard being the most powerful and Gandalf the white, but Sauron the white stays the white. And it's almost like I kind of wish he would have changed robe colors to signify that they're not both the white.
Yeah, and he does in the books. Yeah, in visually they use Saruman for a different purpose in a way. In the books, this is also worth mentioning because it makes a small appearance, which is more of an Easter egg in the movie, The Fellowship of the Ring. When Galadriel is showing Frodo the mirror, she pours the water into the mirror. Frodo looks into the mirror. He sees all of his friends looking at him kind of, skeptically. And then it pans to the Shire on fire. This happens, more or less, at the very end of Return of the King, the last book, where Saruman is still alive in the book. He flees with Grima Wormtongue back to the Shire, enslaves the hobbits, and it is the final task of the hobbits upon their return to go, oh my gosh, we just crossed the world, destroyed a ring, want to go home, and now we have to fight off Saruman all by ourselves. It's a great thematic moment within the book because it is the culmination of all of the character development for the 4 hobbits. Because they come back, and without aid from Aragorn, without aid from Gimli, Legolas, the kingdoms of man, they're able to oust Saruman from Hobbiton.
Part of that as they're like self-sufficient and they've developed as characters and heroes. I don't like that for the aspect that you just had the climax with the One Ring and Sauron, and like it's kind of anticlimactic to then go back and be like, oh, okay.
What I don't like is the idea of it's the final task, which means that points to a larger power. And that higher power then is setting this fate and setting the story to their behalf.
Yeah.
If you're saying that is a final task, somebody has already predetermined they would get to this far, and that this was something they would have to complete, which means it's not free will. Thoughts?
I don't like the thought of fate either, that we are our own choice, we're our own free will in a part of this.
Yeah. No, I agree. I always think of The Matrix.
Yeah.
With that, when Morpheus asks Neo about fate, I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life. Yeah, but in regard to fate within the books, I definitely think there's a lot of that. There's a lot of talk about timing. So Aragorn waiting for the right moment before he makes his claim to the throne. All these events are happening now because they were meant to happen. It's like the planets aligning, right? It's those types of events.
Do you want to have the discussion of fate now, or do you want to wait?
We can skip ahead because we just touched on it. So let's just dive into fate.
Okay,
then.
so this idea of fate then. So does Frodo have the free will to make these decisions?
I don't like fate at all because it feels like something you look at in hindsight and then you review and say, oh, he made this decision or fate made that decision for him. No, he made the choice. That's his own free will to do it. I don't like that he made it because fate and it was foretold that he was going to do that. It's always reviewed in retrospect.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. True, and I agree, especially from the movie side of things. I don't think the idea of fate or prophecy plays into it as much. In the book, it's not even, don't get me wrong, I don't remember parts in the book where Tolkien is necessarily hitting you over the head with the fact that this is fate, this is what it was destined to be. There are moments where it certainly seems that way. Just, I know I keep mentioning Aragorn, but he's very much like waiting for that part. But in terms of the hobbits and their quest, I definitely give credit to Frodo for making that decision because he believes it's the right thing to do outside of what fate has determined he should be doing.
Yeah,
so I don't think fate controls his decision.
Agreed. I don't think fate shows up in Frodo's as much as it shows up in Aragorn's. And I think with Aragorn's, I think that is fate that, hey, you can't run from your claim to the throne, that your ancestors were the guy that basically gave up the ring, or basically caused this to begin, like this chain reaction.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's your claim, your throne to sit on, and you might have to hold that ring. I think that's kind of definitely more fate-driven than Frodo deciding. But again, I don't know. I'm just curious if is the decision his? Granted, I guess he could say no, but if you think about all the pressure from Bilbo and the adventures and the Shire, and the Gandalf clearly doesn't give him much option to not take the ring. I don't think he really has a say by that point. Gandalf is a very influential person to the hobbits.
Oh, yeah, very much
specifically
so.
to a young Frodo Baggins.
Who clearly looks up to him.
Physically and literally.
Yes, very true.
I think that's something that's a lot of pressure put on him. And when they get to that council in, was it Rivendell?
Yep, in Rivendell.
And he realizes by that point, it's probably his decision then, because he sees all the fighting that's going on with these different groups of people, and that they can't come together. And I think that's his choice to take it from there. I don't think he makes a choice to go to Rivendell. I think that's made for him. I think he makes a choice from Rivendell to go to Mordor.
I think that's a great point to bring up. And I think that is very much him finally stepping into his new role. We talked about the unlikely hero.
Yeah.
That's the first part where he truly takes his first steps, I think, into what his character is going to develop into at that point. Yeah. Because in the movie, too, he even talks about, with Sam, I think he mentions that, we did what we set out to do, let's go home. And he's planning to sit through the Council of Elrond just to be there. Hey, guys, I brought this, and then take off and go back to the Shire. Just like you said, Garrett, he steps up. He says, I'll do it. I'll take it.
How about fate of any other characters? Does anybody else? I mean, we know Aragorn and his story. How about anybody else?
Yeah. In regard to elves, so not necessarily specific characters, there's an argument that could be made for Arwen, because the fate of Arwen and Aragorn are tied, certainly. So there's an argument to be made there, but taking a step back from that, the elves are, in a way, I would say, destined to leave Middle-earth. Their power is diminishing. You get a lot of these kind of allusions to the fact that they're going to be leaving for the Grey Havens.
I have a question for you, Joe, on this, too, because I missed this during the movie. But why are the elves leaving with this impending army being built in Mordor and saying, you guys are going to have to fend for yourself, essentially? Yeah, there's a couple different things to consider with that. The first being that the elves are in control of three rings of power still. Sauron never recovered them. Sauron doesn't have as much dominion over those elven rings of power. So it's almost a lose-lose in a way. They know now that the ring is discovered, the One Ring has been discovered. They are going to be sending a contingent of people to try and destroy the ring. Once that ring is destroyed, the power of their own elven rings is greatly diminished. So they're going to be losing in that sense. If they don't destroy the One Ring, Sauron's going to reobtain power, and he's going to make life a living hell for everybody. So a lot of it has to do with them, essentially the age of elves is over, and now it's time for humanity to essentially take over and be caretakers of Middle-earth from here.
And they probably don't trust humans. There's a lot of mistrust between these civilizations.
That's right. And that's conveyed during the movie, too.
Correct.
Yeah, very much so.
I think that's probably, they know he was at the first war, right, where they cut the ring off. He saw, is it Isildur? Didn't throw the ring in.
Nope.
So he doesn't trust men. He doesn't really trust Aragorn. He brings that up to Gandalf. He's like, do you trust him? That type of conversation they have in Rivendell. I just don't think elves trust the duplicity of men to not have that ring of power.
It's true. Yeah. So there's a lot of uncertainty there.
How about I don't know, I'm just trying to think if there's any other fate with any other characters.
The those are the main ones that spring to mind for me. The argument, I'm sure, can be made for other characters, but in terms of fate, from the overarching perspective, like Middle-earth's history, it's those characters and elves as well that kind of jump out.
What about, so one thing, and I guess, I don't know if this is fate versus just, I don't know if it's a different category. Let me see if you got a different one.
Sure.
I want to talk about this idea of changing. So, when I think of the four hobbits, on their return, and again, this would be in Return of the King, right? So this is when the story journey is over. Mm-hmm. They kind of remind me of this stereotypical depiction of when people talk about veterans returning from war, right? Mm-hmm. They kind of show them in the bar, they're drinking, they're not really taking account of what's going on around them, they're not jovial, they're not jolly, they're not happy, they're not dancing, right? Nobody knows what they went through. They only know what they went through.
They have no idea.
And it kind of has this bond between the four of them where they just get their beers, they drink it together, they leave together. It kind of reminds me of this depiction of like veterans returning from wars, right? That we don't like us who didn't go clearly don't understand the burden that was put on them or the sacrifice that they made. Yeah. Therefore, we go about our lives not understanding what was at risk the entire time they were in conflict. And I don't know if that's, I don't want to say fate, I don't know if that was where that would fit in, but that's something that kind of reminds me of that scene at the end of Return of the King.
Yeah, that's, I think, an excellent point. Worth noting, too, the age of Tolkien when he wrote these. So he grew up during World War I, actually was in World War I, fought in World War I, and obviously was alive during the events of World War II as well. So there's a lot of, I think, different influences that he had. Now, I know the movie, obviously, that's Peter Jackson's interpretation of those things. But I think it's worth noting to people who might not know that Tolkien was alive during the World Wars, and I'm sure that had an impact on.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the parallels between a force taking over everything and basically removing anything that's not similar to it.
Yeah, and that idea of nature versus technology too, in terms of the kind of the dualism again that we were talking about earlier. So there's a lot of things in regard to that we could certainly touch on. But did you have any other ideas regarding fate specifically?
No, I don't. I mean, probably tomorrow, but not now.
Yeah, fair. That's what I always do, too. I think of something after the fact.
Yeah.
Like, I do have a very side note, on a probably a lighter note, is if you want a good chuckle, and you're at work, or maybe a smirk, a laugh out loud something, just Google the meme, "One does not simply." And then read through all of those, because there's so many funny things that come. And this is based on Boromir during the meeting at Elrond. So many funny things that come out of it.
One does not simply walk into Mordor.
Yes.
Simply walk into Mordor.
But if you're looking for a chuckle, lighten up your day. Go Google that.
That's very true. I'm just going to back up. We're done with fate, I think, is a theme. But just to touch on dualism again, won't get too much into nature versus technology. I think that one's actually pretty self-evident in the movies, the idea that it's essentially this war machine in terms of Saruman's forces, and Sauron's forces willing to burn anything and everything to enhance their own power. Right. And there's that scene I think you mentioned earlier, Garrett, where the orc comes up to him mentioning how strong the trees are when he's burning down the trees around him, and he just says to rip them all down. Yeah. He doesn't care anymore. Just destroy all the trees so you can kind of fuel your forges, essentially.
Yeah, so it's not so much that they just have to build this army. They, in order to do that process, they have to tear down everything that's good around the tower to do it, to fuel those fires.
Well, they have to. It's also mass production. Not only are they digging people literally out of the ground, they have to build. They have to build weapons for them and armor for them. It's a military industrial complex of mass production of weapons and people.
That's
resources.
Exactly what I picked up on too. I just had a note here that's like, crudely made weapons. There's no artistry, which you see a lot in like a lot of the elven things where there's designs inlaid in the swords or the weapons, and it's all about efficiency and getting the numbers out and just kind of the brutality of how those things are made and how they're intended to be used as well.
It kind of mirrors, and not to squat on Germanic history, but it mirrors German production of engineering in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, basically, where they were just outproduced. I shouldn't say the 1920s, they weren't, but 30s and 40s, they were just outproducing everybody, and their engineering was superb. Granted, they're not engineering quality, but they're mass-producing quantity, and I think that's key.
You could argue V2 rockets too. I mean, they were the first to get to those. The other thing, I mean, a part of the industrialization thing is, if you look at humans from cavemen to now, I mean, I'm sure we've killed humans left and right, depending on whatever our needs were. But the only thing technology brings is efficiency in doing that very same thing.
Well, one thing I have, and I guess, Joe, this would be a question for you.
Sure.
In the movie, they're clearly digging out what looks almost more like orcs, not goblins, right?
The Uruk-hai, right?
Right.
Uruk-hai.
So,
that's correct.
but he's also digging out basically the people who become the leaders. Why are they in the ground?
Yeah, that's a classic fantasy trope, and to be honest with you, Garrett, I would need to read up on.
I think I
Tolkien
touched on that. I think I read on that there's a line by Tolkien that reads that they were born of because
they were elves. They were former elves.
They were born of the grease and the dirt of the earth, or something along those lines. And then Peter Jackson took it kind of in a more literal sense and made it visually within the movie.
Oh, that's awesome! Yeah. And a lot of the times, this idea of a goblin or orc spawning pit, the idea that the way these creatures are created is so unhuman, is so different from anything that should happen in the natural world. Yes. So that's awesome. Thank you, though, Nate, for that, because I think that's a great little piece of info that helps translate that to the screen.
So another tidbit, I mean, just to touch on about war is the psychology of killing another human being. You have to kind of create this psyche that they are inhuman in that sense.
Sure.
So it's much easier for you to comprehend and side with humans when they're killing things that are so far removed from what looks like a human and acts like a human that you grow that desensitivity to doing it. Otherwise, you have some sort of emotional connection to it.
Right. The symbolism of the idea of the savage, that you make your enemy the savage, therefore you have to either defend yourself and kill them, or you have to simply just kill them, right? But obviously, if you flip that around, the orcs don't have that idea of them being savage.
And the other thing on war, too, is war only works when both people think they're doing the right thing, right? And they have the same justification for the same cause, but exactly opposite views, right? Because if someone has a smaller willpower, they're just going to be overcome.
Sure.
But they need to know that they're trying to do the right thing, and that's their motivation for it. But
yeah, and I think that too, and we can move on to the next theme if that's cool with you guys, but that ties back to, I think, Tolkien's approach with just a creature that's inherently evil versus people who are, while flawed, overall good. So the orcs exist, just like you were saying, as a force, an opposition that's designed to foil everything that humanity attempts to do, is as a pure form and embodiment of evil. So, any other topics regarding dualism you want to bring up? Or
I don't think there's no mystery or suspensefulness or thriller element to where you know where you stand. They are good or evil, and you can look at them and know that. It's not like I'm trying to think of another movie or something where you're like, I don't really know if they're doing the right thing or not. You know in this series whether someone is doing something for the right reason or if they're not doing something for the right reason.
They don't really allow for shade. They don't really allow for shades of gray.
Not at all. This
exactly.
And what's ironic is the only gray thing they have in the movie they kill off. Right?
That's
Gandalf the Grey is the only one that's arguably gray, the tint of gray, and he dies.
Yep.
Right? So it's either you take the good or you take the bad. You choose a side, basically.
You choose a side. That is very true. And that was the perfect segue, Garrett, to the next theme that I want to bring up.
It's almost like we planned it.
Yeah, almost like we planned it that way. This idea of bravery, selflessness, and sacrifice. Garrett, you just mentioned sacrifice of one character in particular who's really... Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that, again, you can't... Gandalf... I don't want to say Gandalf the Grey as a character was not in the fight. He was clearly on one side. But this idea that he'd, the symbolism of the grayness that he is, when he sacrifices, he comes to the white, right? Like he's willing to give it all for this cause. And I feel like that's kind of this thing. There's no fence sitting in the story. You're either going to join the combination of the dwarves, elves, and the humans and fight, or you're basically going to be overrun by the orcs because they're not going to let you on their team, right? And so you self-sacrifice. There's a lot of self-sacrifice in this movie.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think the most important one would be Frodo. He just clearly gives up his entire lifestyle, his entire life as he knows it for this adventure. Really all the hobbits do.
They all do.
I think
Yeah,
they
that's
sacrifice
very
more
true.
than anybody. I think everybody else has some form of combination of already being in this fight to some degree. Aragorn might not be literally fighting. He is attached to the bloodline that's been fighting this fight for, however long the years it's been going. The dwarves are obviously massacred. They're in this conflict. The elves are leaving because they know this conflict's coming. I just feel like the hobbits probably are the most, sacrifice of anybody, or at least sacrifice the most.
Yeah, I would agree, especially in regard to personal safety. They're leaving the comforts of their way of life, the only way of life that they've ever known, and then they're going into this situation that is completely above their heads. Gimli's a warrior, Legolas is a warrior, Aragorn's a warrior, Gandalf is one of the most powerful beings in Middle Earth, Boromir's a warrior, and then there's the four hobbits who have really no business doing this, but they know it's the right thing to do.
They're completely naive, and I understand Frodo kind of comes and he says, okay, I understand that I can resist the powers of the ring and I'll withhold this, but as far as like the motivations for the other three, it's hard to develop like some sort of emotional compassion for the other three, and like why they would be so motivated to go from stealing crops out of a farm and having a good old time and smoking weed in the Shire and having 14 meals a day.
Old Toby.
Versus going in and sacrificing potentially their lives for their friend, which, I don't know. Maybe that's a tie to friendship. To
be fair, I usually get to work and have second breakfast too.
It's true.
So I'm not going to disagree with them. I have a question though. So you said this idea of selflessness.
Yeah.
Does selflessness exist though because if you're thinking of selflessness, you're giving something up, right? Or you're helping somebody, or you're giving something to somebody, almost like a sacrifice, to be fair.
I kind of lump these together, yeah.
Is it selflessness, though, if you're not sacrificing something? And so what I mean by that is, this is something that's coming to their doorstep. They can choose to just sit and wait, and they will probably die, or they can choose to fight, and that's not selflessness. That's not even sacrificing, because they don't have a choice in that. They're either fight or you die. So not really giving anything up. Not the hobbits necessarily, but like Aragorn. I don't understand what he would be sacrificing to go on this journey. I don't know if it's selfless of him to go on this journey. I guess, I don't know. I'm having trouble finding this idea because this conflict that we know as viewers is coming to these people. To these characters, they might think, well, this is a selfless act or a sacrificial act. But the reality is, is it really sacrificing when they don't have a choice?
I think that's a great argument. I mean, you know that there's impending doom. It's self-preservation.
Right.
For sure.
Right. And if you're self-preserving, are you sacrificing?
I think in a way you can. And it ties back to the hobbits, largely, of course, for how they're actually approaching this quest.
My understanding is Frodo knows this is a trip that he will not return from, and he's not planning on returning from. Same with Samwise Gamgee, from his standpoint.
Mm-hmm. They know that what they're about, as best they can, that this is hugely perilous, and that they're probably not gonna make it through this. But I get your point. Aragorn is going to step up here. I don't think he's necessarily sacrificed. Obviously, you can make the argument that anything where you're putting your life on the line has the potential to be, obviously you're sacrificing that for a cause you believe in.
Okay.
But I do agree with, if things go down in Middle Earth, regardless of who's taking that ring, the characters of Boromir, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Gandalf, they're going to be involved regardless.
Yep.
So I don't think that it's the same impactful choice that the hobbits make, because the hobbits legitimately could be like, this sounds terrible, I'm not really meant to be a soldier, so I'm going to go home. But none of the four of them do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Nope, agreed.
Yeah, I think it's like duty versus selflessness. Like, they know this task needs to be done, but you don't really know the motivations for, is it selfless in the fact that their name will never be written in texts in the future, or they will be given credit for, helping get the ring to Mordor? I don't think it's really well illustrated in the movies as to what their motivations are, other than they kind of find a duty and they think they're obligated to help the hobbits.
What if I were to try to make the argument the person who sacrifices the most in this movie, outside of the 4 hobbits, is Sauron?
He sacrifices the most, is what you're arguing.
He gives up all alliance and friendship. He gives up the mantle of the most powerful person on this side to now become not the most powerful person on the other side.
Yeah,
So
I don't know.
Occupationally, he gives up the most, as well as friends,
Self-preservation.
family. Right, but he's sacrificing those items for self-preservation.
Yeah.
But then the argument is they're all sacrificing for self-preservation here. So outside of the hobbits, who sacrifices more in this movie? Because you could say Gandalf does, but he actually becomes more powerful.
Oh, he does. It's true.
I don't know. Maybe he took the wrong bet.
Yeah, could be.
He bet red, not black
That's
on
right.
that one,
Yeah, I think that's a strong argument, but I hate Saruman. So, I mean, the guy gets what's coming to him.
Fair enough.
He turns his back on the good people of Middle-earth.
He just bet wrong, right? But it doesn't mean he wasn't sacrificing.
What's that saying about whoever wins the war gets to write the history behind it, sort of thing?
History
Yeah,
written
so-
by the victors kind of deal.
Yeah. So, on the other, if the shoe's on the other foot, he might have been a hero written in the books for that sort of thing too, right?
If Sauron and Saruman won this rebel alliance of this fellowship wouldn't have even mattered, right? The
evil scum
Yep.
came together
Yes.
to ruin the empire.
Yes, these traitor hobbits would have been crushed.
Yeah.
Fair enough. All right, let's press on here. We touched on this a little bit. The idea of death, of course. Boromir kind of sacrifices himself. Bit of a redemption arc within that first movie. He clearly succumbs to the power of the ring. He tries to take it from Frodo. He wakes up out of his stupor, essentially realizing what's happened, and he makes a stand against the approaching Uruk-hai to help save the hobbits. So
Correct.
There's obviously literal death in that sense. Literal death, well, temporary death
Yeah.
for Gandalf.
Correct.
During the scene where he confronts the Balrog, but... Oh, go ahead.
No, I don't know if in this particular movie versus the other 2 movies there's as much symbolism of death. I know that, for instance, like the sacrificing of, say, that when the elves come in the 2 towers to reunite this this bond between humans and elves because they once stood together, they'll stand together now. You see a lot of the elves get destroyed, and and they didn't need to. They could have gone on to the...
And they're immortal. That's a huge sacrifice. I
Right.
mean, the only way
It
they're
is.
killed, they can be killed in
Yeah.
more ways. But
maybe the only other thing of death isn't really so much the literal idea of people dying, but the figurative of like this innocence in these hobbits.
Exactly.
Right? The
Yeah.
death is symbolism of their way of life is shattered and it will never go back to it. Specifically those 4.
Yeah, especially for the 4.
I read that topic as a totally different meaning, as more of like the Nazgul as being quite literally like the Grim Reapers of Middle-earth. I mean, they're all black, they don't have a Sith, but they come by and they kill you, suck the life out of you, and...
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was going for. All of those themes kind of put together, because I think you do, with the ring race, is this physical embodiment of death, almost in a way. Obviously, you have the characters that perish, but then, yeah, so the embodiment of death with these ring wraiths, the idea of innocence being lost, the death of innocence, especially for the hobbits, who have never had to confront these challenges or are suddenly faced with them. And the other one I thought of specifically was the storyline between Arwen and Aragorn as well. The fact that Arwen is willing to give up her immortality to be with Aragorn. Yeah. The idea behind the humanity within Middle-earth, it's actually, death is considered a gift. Their mortality is considered a gift that was bestowed on them. Whereas elves, while they have immortality, they also have to watch everything around them die. Not necessarily their friends or family, who are also elves presumably, but the life around them continually perishes.
Right. Middle-earth is dying.
Middle-earth
right?
is dying, yes. So they have to deal with that as well.
There's a theme there, too, as far as mortality goes. with mortality comes meaning, because if you live for an entire life, things don't have any meaning anymore for you as much as they do for the people who have a short and limited period of time, like the humans do.
Yeah.
And you could argue maybe that it means more to them. Simple things mean more to them than they do to the elves.
Sure.
Definitely. Because the elves have just such a huge scope of what time is. Yeah. Very different from what a human would view time to be, certainly. And that's something, too, in regard to Arwen essentially giving up her immortality to be with Aragorn. That's a decision that she gets to make because she's actually half-elf, essentially. She's a half-elf. So Elrond, her father, is a half-elf. They almost get to choose, like, whether they want to be mortal, basically be more of the human side, or if they want to be immortal and be more along the elven side. And obviously she chooses mortality to be with Aragorn and stay with him. So maybe an element of sacrifice there as well, potentially.
Reminds me of the Knight Templar in Last Crusade. She chose poorly.
She chose poorly. Yeah. But yeah, I won't touch too much more on death. If we do later installments of these types of topics as well, there's certainly a lot more in Two Towers and Return of the King that I think we can dive into there. Anything else on death, though, that you guys wanted to touch on before we move on here? I know we should probably try to wrap things up here, so I'll move forward. This idea of perseverance, we can touch on this one briefly. We've already kind of talked about it already. Obviously, overcoming these seemingly insurmountable odds to achieve their goal, right?
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if there's much to touch on that. I think that we all agree that they clearly overcome a lot. The characters really grow a lot in the face of all these obstacles. Again, and I think it leans more to the hobbits because, like we said at the beginning, there's such an unlikely hero to start that their journey is much greater because they aren't built with the tools or the knowledge to succeed, and they have to gain those along the way. Whereas it seems like every other character kind of already have those instilled with them to survive this quest.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe you could argue the point too is that like people who have a lot of those skills and a lot of those knowledge understand the odds,
sure,
and their limitations along with that. Whereas the hobbits don't really understand what they're up against and really don't understand where their limits are, but they know where the end goal is, and they don't think anything past other than getting to that end goal as far as what odds they're going to have to overcome in order to complete that objective.
Yeah, definitely.
Agreed.
A couple of things, too, I just wanted to read off as quotes. Really, there's a lot of, I'll say, inspirational quotes that really come from the movies, as well as the books, of course. During the scene where Galadriel is talking to Frodo, this is when they've arrived in Lothlorien after the death of Gandalf. And this is where Frodo looks into the mirror that I briefly brought up earlier. Galadriel mentions to him that even the smallest person can change the course of the future. And that's kind of the whole point, in a way, that this story is getting at, that this epic journey is getting at, that these unlikely heroes, just like we talked about earlier, have the power within themselves that they can really alter the course of the future. I think that's really cool. Jump in, Nate.
I was going to say, I think that's a great point to bring that, like, everyone has something to bring to the table. You know, everyone holds some sort of value, and I think that's a great theme that Tolkien brings into this and carries throughout. Obviously, with the hobbits, that can't do any magic. They're not great fighters. They're essentially halflings and half the size of anybody else. Mm-hmm. But they have value in that they can carry this ring and have the ability to neglect the evil that everyone else can't do. That's a great theme for life in general, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Another thing, too, one of my favorite quotes, this is actually during a conversation that Frodo has with Gandalf. And Frodo is essentially lamenting the fact that he is alive at the time that the War of the Ring is happening. And he's feeling really frustrated about this, I think. And so Frodo says, "I wish it need not have happened in my time." And Gandalf responds, "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us." What a great quote. I love that part. I think it's a great message overall.
Yeah, again, another great theme for life is, you know, if you can't control anything, then don't worry about it, because exactly for that reason, you don't have control of it. So take control of the things that you do have control of, and, you know, make your life better with those decisions.
Definitely.
With those situations.
Anything else to add to that category,
I think that
gentlemen?
goes back to the idea of fate, that fate's not going to control you, that you are born out of your control then, right? So, or maybe fate will control you. You're born into a time that you can't get out of. You don't, whatever events are transpiring around you, you don't control. But you have the control of how you interact with these, elements. So even though you have fate does exist in the idea of you don't get to control that, fate doesn't exist in the idea that you can alter those elements. And I think that's a pretty important fact to make there.
Yeah, very much so. One of the last categories we have here, just a couple left, is the idea of addiction and power that's presented within these movies and within the books. This one I would say is maybe a little bit more obvious as well, of course, with the power that these rings, specifically the One Ring is what's focused on, but really a lot of these rings exert over their owners.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say it's just the ring. I would say it's this idea of power really is more important, right? The ring symbolizes the ultimate power, but this idea of Boromir wants the throne. Aragorn kind of ends up wanting that throne, right? This idea that who wants to be king, who wants to lead, who wants to carry this ring with them. All these different, like I said, power I think is what they're craving. Sauron wants power, so he goes with Sauron.
Exactly.
Right? Gandalf, sacrificial, wants power, sacrifices, fights, comes back as the Whites. It's all about power for these people.
A really relatable quote is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
And that everyone thinks that it's some very interesting concepts that Tolkien brings up is that the most powerful weapon in Middle-earth is this ring. And you can't use it because you'll succumb to the evil that it brings within you. And then the other interesting part is that the only way to destroy this ring is to take it to the most evil place on Middle-earth to destroy it. Very interesting plot points that make for a perfect story for that.
Yeah, very much so.
Everyone wants to use the ring to destroy the evils that are driving it in the first place, and that's exactly what it wants, or Sauron wants.
Yeah, exactly. And we have some very powerful characters that try to take it too. They have to resist. Some do try to take it. Boromir, as we mentioned, he actually tries to steal it. But Gandalf, he struggles to resist it a little bit. Frodo gives it to him or offers it, I should say, to Gandalf willingly. Gandalf says, "Don't tempt me. I would take it from a desire to do good, but through me, it'd be more powerful than I could possibly imagine." Paraphrasing a little bit there. But the idea that Gandalf would take it with the desire to do good, it would corrupt even him. Galadriel struggles to resist it.
Right.
She does, of course, but also the same exact idea. She would take it with a desire to do good, but she'd become immensely powerful, and it would turn her evil eventually.
It speaks to any politician, right? They get in to make a change, and then at the end of the day, they're corrupted by the power and influence they wield. Therefore, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, very much so. It very much is. I think at the very end, it's also worth noting when it after Boromir has already attempted to take it, this is at the final fight sequence in Amon Hen, at the very end, which is an awesome action sequence there at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, but Boromir's already struggled to take it. Frodo's kind of terrified at this point. He's put on the ring. He sees the Eye of Sauron. He knows that he's got to get away from the rest of the Fellowship. This is where the Fellowship breaks, but Aragorn encounters him before Frodo is able to leave. And they have this conversation where Aragorn almost has that one moment where he could take the ring. But Aragorn steps up and realizes it's not his path to do so. He kind of closes Frodo's hand back over the ring, and he knows that it's Frodo's quest at that point. And then Aragorn goes off to save everybody, help save everybody else, right? And he's helping Frodo escape by covering his escape, by fighting off the Uruk-hai while he does so.
Sure.
Yep.
The ring is kind of the cancer of the Fellowship.
Yeah.
And Frodo takes the burden of it because it's the reason why the Fellowship breaks up in the first place, is because there's so much temptation for everyone else to take the ring from him.
Yep. And Frodo realizes that and is willing to go alone so that he doesn't cause further harm and fighting amongst his friends. Yeah.
Joe, do you have any more categories? 'Cause if you don't, I've got an interesting discussion to have with you, gentlemen.
Yeah, fair enough. The last one I had was just this idea of fellowship. I wanted to end on a more positive note than addiction and power.
Oh,
but we've touched on that.
Then you should hold off.
I should hold off on that? All right. Hit us with it here.
Okay.
What we got?
This is not my theory. This is a theory that a lot of critics of Tolkien's work have come up with. This idea of racism in Tolkien's works. We briefly mentioned earlier this idea of dark versus light, white versus black, the symbolism. Mm-hmm. But it's also this idea of the good people of this story, arguably in Tolkien's story, are elves, humans, dwarves. They're all depicted as Caucasian or white, whereas the orcs are obviously depicted as brown, dark, black, whatever it is, right? Types of people. This idea of these dualities of, like I said, the symbolism of white versus black, of coming across of these, this idea that the orcs don't have any other importance but to kill everything, that they're just an invading force, that they're a Mongol force coming in to take over these civilizations that are established with their cultures, is, again, not our theory. This is a theory that a lot of critics have of Tolkien's work. Specifically, and I'll get to it in a second, I just want to know what you guys think of this idea of racism within Lord of the Rings.
I think it's quite literally different races. You're talking about orcs, goblins, dwarves, elves, halflings. I think it serves more as like a very literal contrast between the two different colors, as far as the races go. But I don't know. I think it's kind of hard to. I think it might be a little bit of a stretch for me.
Yeah, within the world of Middle Earth itself, this idea of orcs, Uruk-hai, goblins being a force of evil, that's kind of how they're built and kind of how they're designed.
Right.
Versus the forces of good, of course. So they're more serving as a mechanical feature, I would say, for the good guys to have to fight against something that's pure evil.
Right.
Within the world of Middle Earth, you can look at it, of course, outside of that, which might be more what you bring up in regard to racism, from how the inspiration was drawn to create some of these characters.
Sure.
And there we certainly can encounter an issue. Yeah.
So a guy, and again, this multiple people have these criticisms, specifically a guy by the name of Andy Duncan. He wrote a short story called Senator Bilbo. And he wrote this, it looks like, if I can remember correctly, first published in 2001 in Starlight number 3. It's a short story about Senator Bilbo Baggins, who is a relative of an actual former U.S. Senator Theodore Baggins, I believe. Or, sorry, Theodore Bilbo, I think his name is, who was part of a KKK. And the idea that in this Senator Bilbo story, that Bilbo Baggins is a senator, but he's a politician of the Shire, trying to keep the Shire a homogeneous society and not let any outsiders in. And this idea goes back to these outside forces that you don't take the time to understand what the orcs want, right? We just assume the orcs want to kill everything. How do we know that's their real aim and goal, right? And that's what these critics are arguing, that we don't get the shades of gray. To them, it's just good versus evil, right? It's that dichotomy of dualism we talked about, good and evil. The good guys wear white, the black guys wear black, the humans and the elves and the people who look human are good, the people who clearly look like monsters are bad. But how do we know that all they want to do is kill everything?
I also think it's a very childish way to look at the world, that everything's black and white, because there's so many shades of gray when decisions are made. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it's usually kind of the lesser of two evils, and you're trying to do good as best you can, but some people are going to be affected negatively in that process.
Yeah, agreed.
But
okay. So end on Fellowship then, Joe.
End on Fellowship. All right, we'll bring it home here for you guys.
So this is probably our longest episode, so apologize for anybody that's still listening. I refuse to break
I was assuming this was going to be a short one, honestly.
I refuse to break this into 2 episodes. So I got some feedback that people are like, we should break these long ones into 2 episodes. I refuse. Okay? So either stick with us, well, just stick with us. Don't turn it off.
Please. We're almost done.
Hang in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, to end in regard to Fellowship, which is an obvious theme throughout this, right?
Yeah.
The book and movie is literally titled The Fellowship of the Ring, but it's a very common theme and a hugely important theme. We keep talking about the hobbits, of course, but there's a lot that goes on between the other members of the Fellowship as well. So you've got this relationship between Gimli and Legolas, of course. That eventually, we don't see it change too much in the Fellowship of the Ring, so skipping ahead a little bit, obviously they become become hugely best friends as a result of this.
I think the symbolism of fellowship isn't just the said group of people that make this journey. It's the idea that all these different civilizations are coming together. All these different cultures are coming together. Different races, literal races,
one
coming
cause.
together for one cause, right?
Yeah.
But not just that, but the idea that you can't do this alone. That you can achieve greater together on the same side, working for the same cause, whatever that cause be, versus one person. Frodo would never have survived walking on his own, right? And that's kind of the point. Even though maybe he just has Samwise and later Gollum on his side walking with him, he still has fellowship with him. He still has somebody there to have his back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's hugely important too, the idea that they are unifying to help fight against these hugely traumatic experiences that, if they haven't already experienced them, are going to certainly experience them shortly when this impending war begins. Yeah. So yeah, that idea of unity, of course, and I want to give a shout out to the character of Samwise, who I think is arguably one of the most heroic people in the story because of how his close friendship with Frodo and how he sticks with him throughout the entire journey.
I have a criticism for that besides what you might just cite off. What is his motivation other than friendship with Frodo? Because he goes out there, and if you're watching the movie, at the end of the Fellowship, he is trying to catch this canoe. He can't swim. I mean, like, he could just go back to the Shire and go back to his comfy life again, but he has this tie that he promised Gandalf that he would stick with Frodo till the end, essentially.
Exactly.
And that's
just honorable.
It's hugely honorable. I think that's such a major part of the story. His word actually means something, and holy cow, do I think we need more of that. Because Sam made a promise. Not only did he make a promise, but he made a promise to Gandalf and a promise to his best friend that he would stick with him regardless of the hell they have to go through. And I think that's a hugely important lesson, because he's probably also one of the people sacrificing the most, because, yeah, he could have left. Frodo gave everyone else the opportunity to leave. That's why he wanted to sneak away.
He tried to leave everybody.
He tried to. Sam catches up with him and says, no, I'm here to help protect you and to stick with you through thick and thin, regardless of what happens, because I promised to do it, and you're my friend. I'm going to stick by your side. I think that's immensely important as a lesson to take away from that.
Yeah, he's just not the best. He's not my favorite character.
Well, that's fair. I mean,
that's all I can say.
In regard to cool characters, obviously we have other people that can fill those roles.
I'll say there's some emotionally intense moments where there's some eye contact between Samwise Gamgee and Frodo Baggins, and I'm sure people know what I'm talking about, where you just question some things.
We're going to leave that there for next time. Next time, I think that's everything we had, Joe, right?
Yeah, that's everything we had. We appreciate you listening. We know we ran long on that
one. So again, apologies for that. We didn't want this podcast to be the same length as the actual movie, so hopefully we're a little bit short. We do appreciate all your guys' feedback. Please go out and give us a rating on iTunes, 5 stars. Hit subscribe. Tell your friends. Tell your families. We'd like to hear your feedback. We want comments too. If there's a topic you want us to cover, let us know. You can get us on Twitter at Alien and Cowboy, or email us at aliensandcowboys@gmail.com. Does anybody have anything else?
I think that's perfect.
I can't appreciate enough any feedback that you guys provide, good, bad, indifferent. It helps us.
Yeah, and again, if you want any topics, let us know. Until then, guys, see you next week. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.